So let's talk about the purpose of this series. The entire webinar series is going to try to equip you with the tools and mindset to actually take the first or next steps of an effective data analysis. Whether you're new to this work or looking to sharpen your approach, you'll leave with clear strategies to make data more meaningful and more actionable in your role. Today, part one, we're really going to be looking at the very beginning steps where we're building and executing a data philosophy. Then in part two, we're going to be looking at identifying data practices for your school or identifying data and the practices for your school or district when identifying and leveraging that data. And then parts three and four, we're going to take a dive actually into Eduphoria where we're going to be leveraging data visuals in Eduphoria. This won't necessarily in parts three and four, that's not necessarily going to be a how to use Eduphoria. It's instead going to be how to get the most out of what Eduphoria already has to offer. And there's going to be a lot to that, so we're breaking it into two separate pieces. Now, I really, really want to encourage you. We have a lot of people that registered for this. And I think a lot of people are going to be catching the recordings, but spread the word about this, especially as we get into parts three and four. I think you're going to get a lot of really great insights into how to actually use some of the tools, especially in our Aware Premium services, to actually really get the most out of your data analysis practices. So why is this entire series important? At the end of it, the bottom line is when we understand our data, we can lead with clarity, confidence, and purpose. Having a really solid data philosophy for each goal and data goal that you have in your district or in your school or even in your data teams really helps with the decision-making process, whether that's decisions related to instruction, decisions related to supporting teachers or supporting students, decisions related to intervention. And with that word intervention, it's for the kids that need remediation, but also for the kids that need enrichment. Intervention often gets tied to one and not necessarily both. And also making decisions related to resources. And by resources, I mean the things that you're using and purchasing to actually do the day-to-day, the curriculum you buy, the test series that you buy, the books that you get for your students, all of the things that you're using, even some of the staff decisions that you have to make. How is the data used so that you can lead with clarity, confidence, purpose in making all of those decisions? So here's why it matters. It leads to smarter decisions. Data highlights what's working and what isn't working. It allows us to focus our efforts where they're going to have the greatest impact. It helps us also use time and resources wisely. In analyzing how data is collected and used, it can help us reveal inefficiencies and help streamline our systems. It helps us uncover what students and teachers need most. Again, linking back to that concept of efficiency. By looking deeper into performance and demographic data, we can ensure our strategies are equitable and targeted. It helps us build trust and momentum. When small wins are backed by data, we can build credibility and build support for larger initiatives. It's easier to take out of buckets that are full, and that concept applies here. And ultimately, it strengthens teaching and learning. By aligning leadership decisions with the same data teachers rely on a day-to-day basis, we can create a shared language for growth and improvement. So why do we need to create a data philosophy? Well, I'm going to link that to a sort of analogy or scenario, if you will. When building a house, what's the most important thing to consider first? A lot of people might say it's the foundation, and I would challenge that by saying it's not even the foundation, it's actually below that. It's starting with a solid context, it's starting on solid ground before you build your foundation. You have to ensure that the material being built upon is solid. It's not enough to have a concrete foundation. You can't build a concrete foundation on top of sand. You can't build a concrete foundation on top of typical soil. You have to have something more solid than that underneath it. So in this metaphor, the material being built upon in the district is your culture. Are you ready for changes? Are your staff members ready for changes? Are your staff members hungry? Are your administrators willing to be flexible? Some of those things are beyond the scope of this webinar series, but you get the general idea. But once you know for sure where you're building off is the right place to build, then you have to pour the foundation on top of that. The foundation in this scenario is building the guardrails for people to begin communicating and start establishing a process that is safe and accessible. Coupled with that are the boundaries that you're going to work within while executing your data philosophy. So for example, within those boundaries, you can't build your house into other people's lots. So where's the work actually being defined? In a district context, it's difficult to make a one-size-fits-all approach with any data philosophy. It's like building your house on a lot or other people's lots that don't belong to you. It doesn't work for them. What you're doing and looking at um, doesn't necessarily apply to their context and what it is that they need. So we're going to look at that a little more deeply. So what are the benefits of creating, spreading, and reinforcing a data philosophy? Well, you're going to make it easier for your staff to do their jobs and reach their goals. With a clear direction about the hows and the whys of data analysis, teachers can make more informed decisions that support students. Department heads can can provide better support for their teachers. Instructional coaches can provide better support for their teachers. Principals can provide better support for their staff and their students. The opportunities for growth here are endless. Plus, at the end of the day, it's saving you time after it's established. Time is a super valuable commodity in education, and oftentimes teachers and students are at very low amounts of time. By creating more efficient systems, staff in your community can prioritize greater needs, make smarter decisions, and spend less time agonizing over things that they maybe don't hardly understand or don't really want to do. And a unified, solid data philosophy, especially in practice after the growing pains of establishing it are past, helps teachers save time. The bottom line is it's a series of practices and steps to really make data informed decisions quick, easier, and helps remove the guesswork. So, why are you making the decisions you're making in your district, your school, in your classroom? The data philosophy helps answer those questions and gives you the steps to execute on answering those questions. Context is a powerful solution with a great deal of woes. Context in this case is the ground that you're building the foundation on for your house. It can include your why, and I want to pause on that word why for just a second. Why here is not necessarily the why that you incorporate in your professional development with teachers, and you tell the teachers in their time of struggle or in their time of really needing to reconnect with something that inspires them. You ask them what their why was, and you say, hey, remember your why. This is not the why I'm talking about. The why I'm talking about here is why are you doing what you're doing with the data? It can be loosely affiliated with a teacher's why, but this is more specific than even that. This context foundation must include your how and your what. The why is kind of optional, but the how and the what are musts because any data philosophy and execution of a data philosophy is impossible without the how and without the what. And I'm going to give you some specifics a little bit later on that. We also have to look at and identify like what is the purpose of the goal and with those things tied to that goal, like the purpose of assessments. That data that the assessments that the data is coming out of, do we all understand and align on the purpose of those things? What is the purpose of a purchased resource as we're analyzing that? What is the goal of an initiative or learning that we're trying to apply a data philosophy to? Understanding those things really helps drive a data philosophy home. So, who should make a data philosophy? Well, the answer might be obvious. You think, shouldn't everyone? Yes, but we got to be a little more nuanced. Data philosophies can be created at a number of levels and have different implications at each of those levels. So, for example, district level data philosophies are established at the entity level and should be adhered to across all schools in that district. School level philosophies are going to work within the framework of the district philosophy, but they have the flexibility to add their own processes and flavor to it, applying context of their school to what's being executed. And below that, there should be team level philosophies. And by teams, it could be PLC teams, content teams, grade level teams, whatever that looks like for you in your context. But below that, we've got the team level where the classroom level decisions are actually made. With district level philosophies, when those are established at the entity level, they should be adhered to it across all schools, like I mentioned just a second ago. At this level, they should be the least restrictive as possible to allow for schools and even PLC teams to provide their own distinct flavors and tweaks to their approaches. General approaches should be similar across the board. That's why you have district level kind of structures, but there should always be room for customization. At the district level, a data philosophy should be focused on the whys and provide a framework for expectations. That's the what's in the house. Expectations can be about assessment delivery expectations, timelines, what data is non negotiable and you have to look at, The key pieces of analysis that must be reviewed, like what steps are really essential. So like if you're doing PLCs, the 4 PLC questions, those would be essential. Those would be part of the framework. If we're looking at student growth, what parts of student growth are you looking at? What assessments are the ones you're more worried about? If we're looking at standards and performance on standards, which standards are the essential standards? These are the expectations you might identify at a really high level and pass down. Note, when establishing these things and trying to identify the important things, you have to always keep in mind that if everything is important, then nothing is truly important. I can't emphasize that enough. I've seen too many districts and worked with too many people that were in leadership positions that felt like everything was critical. Nothing is critical if everything is critical. So be really careful here when deciding what you're going to actually establish as part of the framework, and don't overload the people doing the actual data diving. Next, let's look at the school level philosophy. Data philosophies at the school level follow the district framework, but have the flexibility to add their own flair and personality to the processes. For example, we might say at our campus, we use PLCs. At our campus, we use grade level teams. At our campus, we have cross level vertical teams. At our campus, we have certain protocols that we enjoy. We want to include something like the Fundamental 5, or we want to include this general template that works really well for our staff, or this reflection process. This is where the nuance of flavor gets to come in. I'm not saying go create all of those things right this second, but this is where the school gets to weigh in on what is the best approach for their staff and their kids to operate within the framework that you've provided. All schools are very different, and all schools should have the freedom to choose at least a little bit and about how and what that they do when they do what they do. This is also where priorities can be set or refined if there are district expectations. Examples of this might be, we're going to use assessment data to make tutoring groups that drive progress in math and science. We're going to improve curriculum to better include the perspectives and needs of minority students, including children with disabilities. Another one might be providing training opportunities for cross-curricular teaching that encourages literacy in every subject. Those are just a couple of examples of things that have very specific kind of potential within a school setting. We can agree this is a very ambitious list of goals I just gave. However, there's a lot going on in this list that would require the support participation of a lot of different administrators. There may even be some overlap between some of those goals. So actions taken to fulfill one goal could impact more than one goal, such as making improvement in literacy could drive progress in math and science. And then the next or last level is that team level. This is where the PLC, the vertical team, the grade level team, whatever structure that you're following, that group of people actually comes together to do the work. At this level, the group gets to establish the norms, set the pace, and then break apart the work in ways that make the most sense for themselves. Keep in mind, this is also where things can fall apart the easiest. These kinds of things often need to be demonstrated, modeled, reinforced, remodeled, redefined, remodeled again, reinforced again, do it some more, and then finally it has to be monitored once you decide it's actually going the way you think it needs to be going. Eventually, you want the team level to be a well-oiled machine that functions on its own. However, getting it there requires work and a culture that embraces its own approach. So let's look a little bit at where level 2 and level 3 meet, the school and the team level. With the goal, let's use as the example of using assessment data to make tutoring groups that drive progress in math and science. Math and science grade level leaders will need to work with their principal and the teachers to accomplish this goal together. If the principal has requirements for data collection and analysis, then grade level administrators can pass this information along and provide the support and assistance needed to make those practices commonplace. If the principal doesn't pass those expectations for how this should be done, then maybe grade level administrators or team leaders could and should fill in those gaps wherever appropriate. They can also add their own sub goals to this, more related to process. Maybe they dedicate one PLC meeting a week to look at assessment data and then using it to create reteach and enrichment opportunities. Maybe they create monitor groups after each assessment that makes it easier to reteach students with common misconceptions. Maybe they need to talk to teachers about common problems with curriculum and assessments and look at those to help uncover how they could help bridge student learning gaps and improve those curriculum and assessment pieces. So those are the 3 levels: district, school, and team. with the least restrictive at the top and slightly more restrictive as you go, and allowing even the team to make a lot of important decisions about how it works. Now, quick note, you've already established things. Things are going well for whatever your goal is and whatever your data philosophy is. We'll actually get into the nitty gritty of what a data philosophy is and looks like here in a minute. I want to hit on the idea of follow through. Things that are not checked on are optional. Things that are optional often are not done. While you're leading by example and setting out things like reminders and you're checking in on the teams as they're doing the work, keep in mind that you're establishing the narrative around the data with your follow through. So you have to ask yourself, is what you're doing actually optional? Are your data practice optional? How often are you actually checking in on it? So let's talk about that as its entire like own kind of subtopic, monitoring your data philosophy. After it's created and after it's actually implemented, when implementing your data philosophy at any of the levels we discussed, monitoring progress and the overall health of the system is vital to its long-term success. It's true that things that aren't monitored become optional over time, but it's also true that if everything is important, then nothing is important. Then you have to set the stage to determine what's most critical, and in turn, what could you possibly take off the plates and make room for this? Then, once there's room, what are you doing to keep track of and make sure that things are moving smoothly? The easiest thing to do is to have some sort of system of documentation to keep track of regular progress. This can be really informal with just generic positive style feedback like notes or slips. Something like a got you doing something cool piece of paper. In my former district, the mascot was the Pirates. And so we created slips of paper just titled Pirate Positives that we left behind, that kind of thing. So really informal. It can also be super formal as well. This is where Eduphoria's Better Together story really comes into play. Aware can provide all of the data that's needed for well-oiled data philosophy, but Strive can provide the necessary connections to documentation and observation to make sure it's healthy. If you're using t-test as your observation rubric in Texas, there's an entire component in domain one all about planning, standards alignment, data analysis, assessment practices, and understanding your students. If you're implementing a PLC process or something similar, those things hit domain one absolutely everywhere. And domain one is historically one of the hardest portions of the t-test rubric to actually gather evidence for. So consider crafting some kind of walkthrough form where you can get into a PLC, watch what's going on, gather some really positive evidence, and then provide some really valuable feedback on the process that you spent time and money training them on. Keep in mind, this is not about gotcha. This is about reinforcement and refinement and honing the craft. So let's look at what portions of the t-test rubric. I wanted to call out specifically why conducting a walkthrough on PLC can be so valuable and where it fits. So within domain one, the PLC can actually, you can gather direct feedback and evidence for an entire group of teachers in one sitting. So imagine you've got a team of 4 teachers sitting there talking during their PLCs. They're answering the 4 questions. They're looking at data. They're talking about the content. They're talking about students. In one 15-minute sit down for 4 teachers, you can get really solid evidence on planning 1.2, where you're actually gathering data on the teachers gathering and using data for instructional planning. Knowledge of students in 1.3, using the PLC processes to address student strengths and needs. Activities 1.4, identifying content to spiral and students to target for remediation, and achieving expectations in 2.1. And I know that's in domain 2, but it's worth calling out. Challenging all students and addressing student mistakes. Really great opportunity to get documentation here in a place that's not typically monitored very well. Okay, now let's get into actually developing your data philosophy. Okay, I'm going to show you something, and it might seem a little overwhelming at first, but I caution you, don't let it swallow you up. This slide has a lot of text on it, and it may even be difficult to read because there's so much text on it. But these are, in summary, the 10 essential steps to building a data philosophy. Now, in building a data philosophy, I'm going to talk in broad strokes across all 10 of these steps. I'm not going to take a deep dive into every single one of them because I really want you to dive into each of these and develop your own approach and your own flavor for doing each of these things. But by the end of these 10 steps, I think you're going to have a pretty solid understanding of what a data philosophy is supposed to actually look like and what it should include and how to get there. I'll go ahead and caveat as I go into it. Step 5 out of these 10 steps is where the data philosophy begins to actually coalesce. And you have something that you could put pen to paper and say, this right here is our data philosophy. So go with me step by step here. Step 1 is to establish a goal that's going to drive action. Establishing a goal will frame out the remainder of all of the actions when establishing your data philosophy at any level. Keep in mind that when making a goal, the core focus and getting it moving before moving on to the next goal is something that you have to get just a good cadence with. Too many goals at one time means none of the goals are actually going to be met. Some goals take less time than others, so this could be an iterative process that you go through more than one time in a year. Some examples of some goals could be like, we need to build better assessments, or we need to improve student growth. We need to improve teacher evaluation scores. What is your goal? Creating or pinning down a goal can be a collaborative process or just a top-down approach where you're the one deciding this should be the goal. The goal should be informed by data, however. Data can be quantitative or it can be qualitative, but it should be gathered to determine what is the most important thing, pinning that down, and then identifying why you're making it that goal. To be clear, some of the goal examples I described above may seem reasonably small compared to an entire data philosophy, but I actually think, on a grander sense, what you're thinking about there at that stage is more along the lines of a data vision rather than a data philosophy. Individual goals within a data vision can have their own data philosophies. And so we're talking about what is the data philosophy and execution for each independent goal. Each goal's philosophies can sometimes vary from other goal philosophies in very large ways. Now let's talk about step 2. You've identified and written down your goal. Now you need to create your dream team of data collection analysis gurus. Now that you've identified the goal, this is where things become a team sport and where it becomes non-optional for it to be a team sport. Now, you may have identified a goal independently, but you need to work together with people that know what they're doing with data to verify that this goal is the right goal. I call out this step as essential because too often leaders in schools and school districts tend to get stuck with leaning in on the exact same people over and over and over for everything. You may be a small district and have no choice but to lean on the same people. However, if you've got resources, tap into that. Get creative about who you pull in. Is there an education expert at a local university with a student in your district that could you maybe pull into conversations? Are there a couple of teachers that have built a reputation for digging into data, leveraging it, and making big strides in their classrooms? Do those teachers need an opportunity to serve on some kind of committee like this? Are there any data whiz principals in the district that would like to stretch their muscles on a larger problem? Don't restrict yourselves to the people immediately at your fingertips in central office. Or if you're a principal doing this at your school, don't restrict yourself to the people in your leadership team or just immediately in your front office. Once a team is assembled, dig through the metrics and decide, is this the right goal for us? If it isn't, make some adjustments to the goal with that team. If it is the right goal, you can move on to the next step. Armando, did you see you're on the picture there?
Love it. Thank you.
Next step, write a list of objectives that align with your goal. So using your team, start exploring and writing down what specific and measurable outcomes you want to see and come out of that goal. These outcomes can be written like SMART goals if necessary, but always make sure that they're measurable and time bound if nothing else. You don't want to get stuck in an endless loop of good ideas with no results coming out of it. So what are you looking for and when do you want it to happen by? Make sure that your timelines are reasonable as well, because you cannot rewrite all of your assessments in a month. You cannot correct student growth in a single semester. Write down all of these things without any consideration to priority yet. It's more about capturing ideas than it is about making sure all of the ideas are the right ideas. Step 4. The natural extension to step 3 is then sorting through and organizing all of those objectives for the goal that you've identified. Do this in a sort of priority order. Don't get too stuck on the details of deciding which, objective is fifth or sixth, because maybe they're both equally important. That is probably entirely true, and you can get a lot of things lost in nitpicking if you aren't careful. However, if you have equally important objectives in the first position, then you may have a problem with needing to whittle out a secondary goal. At really high levels, if you can't decide if this objective is more important than that objective, you probably need to separate one of them out and make it the next goal to achieve rather than a part of this goal. However, if there's a clear and distinct order to things at the high end of the list, you're probably in the right ballpark. This is very much a triage kind of approach here. Where's the highest need with the outcomes and objectives that we've listed out that has the best bang for our buck? We probably want to start there unless there's a different outcome that is a prerequisite for the outcome for the other outcomes to be successful. What data is necessary to understand and how and when each of those objectives are met? It's not enough to do it by just gut feeling. Truly lasting change is built upon a foundation of understanding that what and why for the entire plan. This is at the beginnings of how your data philosophy for this goal will actually impact whether the goal is achieved or not. You have to write down and make very clear what you're going to look at related to the goal and how to actually look at it. Too often, that second part, the how to look at it, is overlooked. And in today's education climate, where the average teacher experience before moving into leadership roles keeps dropping every single year, many people are coming into education leadership without the years long developed ability to actually look at data in a lot of different ways to draw really rich conclusions. You have to be intentional about how the data is to be analyzed and demonstrated. Provide frameworks where necessary and build resources to train those people. Remember, the data philosophy is different than a data vision. We're setting up a data philosophy for a very specific goal. This is where I promise step 5. It's where things start really getting onto paper about how this works. Beliefs are often at a very high level throughout any of this and linked to or come directly from a data vision, a district vision, or some other large scope of thought. And it should guide and provide boundaries for every professional in the district. But sometimes they need to be more nuanced. Large beliefs that might apply to every goal might be something like every student can learn, every student can grow, or every teacher matters. These are truly great and phenomenal beliefs, these are worth writing down. But we want to get to more specific than that for each goal. Be sure to include more narrow beliefs around specific practices attached to the goal. For example, you may be thinking that your goal is to establish data analysis teams in your district or PLCs. What specific beliefs do you need to guide that? If your goal is to build better assessments, what beliefs need to guide that? Let's pick on building better assessments as a specific example. One belief you might have about building better assessments is that all assessments should have an instructional purpose. Another might be that not all assessments are summative. Another might be all assessments need to be aligned to the standards. One more might be not all assessments need to be graded. And those are just a few. Write these beliefs down because you're going to use them to refine the list of objectives that you wrote in the previous step and really ask yourself, are all of the objectives fitting squarely into the beliefs that we've written down? Now, you might be asking, shouldn't this happen before you dig into specific objectives? In practice, I see why you might think that, but when you're actually in and making this happen, I actually find that doing that order rather can sometimes work opposite to what you're actually wanting to achieve. Sometimes your data gurus and the team that you pulled together, when you're building that philosophy with, they can really get bogged down into the what they think is most important when it differs from someone else. Honor that by getting all of the ideas down first and then refine the list by applying a filter of beliefs to the list. Doing this allows everyone to feel like they've been heard and then opens discourse around honest beliefs that are shared across the broader group without just dismissing things out of hand. Notice I called this star out as 5A. 5B is where we actually draft that list of expectations. We're actually drafting the data philosophy now. Everything we've talked up to now is about the frame of the house. We built the on top of the context, that was the ground. We had we had the culture, which was the ground. We had the context, which was the foundation. And now we've kind of talked about the framing. Now we have to get into the details. These are the things that build up the walls, that lay out the details of what kinds of fixtures get attached to those walls and the sinks and what those look like. For many of us here today, this is really what the data philosophy really looks like. This is the specifics that need to be shared that you can officially say, quote, this is our data philosophy for this goal. While mostly true, keep in mind that a data philosophy is guided by a lot of things before this list is even set into stone. They are a part of the data philosophy too and should be weighed out equally, if not more, important than the actual list of procedures. Teachers will follow the steps, but they have to understand why what they're doing is important. So, with those beliefs that you've identified, and that list of outcomes and objectives, it's time to list out the procedures and expectations. If you're at a district level, think as loosely as possible. If you're at the school level, a little more detailed, and as a team, be as explicit as you can be. Here, you'll need to actually record things that, like, what is the specific data you're looking at? Is it from unit tests? Is it from benchmarks? Is it NWEA map results? Is it formative assessments in class? Is it student samples that you're bringing into the meeting? Is it attendance data? Is it behavior data? Is it something else? What is it you're looking at? What is it that needs to be reviewed? Then decide to what depth it needs to be reviewed and write that down. How nuanced and what steps need to be taken and considered while you're reviewing that data? What questions need to be asked? It's very helpful to write down questions that you'd like to have asked and answered as a part of this process. Then think about the cadence. How often will this occur? Where does this happen? Some of these things need to be explicit and some of them need to be loose so that levels below you can make the decisions they need to, but they all need to be considered. Some goals also don't need different layers of attention and focus the same way that others do. So use the context of the goal and the objectives that you've drafted in trying to outline the specific steps and expectations for your data philosophy. Once the philosophy is down, you have to actually create messaging that's going to help spread that philosophy. Um, how you share the philosophy and the framework for schools or teams downstream will play a massive role in how well the goal will be achieved. District, school, and team cultures are foundational for success in the classroom and in the PLC space. Step 6 here can be a hefty lift as there's an implied culture test that needs to take place. Are the people that you're about to share this goal with in a space mentally where they're prepared to hear this? Recall I asked you about their plates. Teachers and principals have too much going on in their worlds, and to add something without taking something off is tantamount to a level 1 crime. What are you prepared to take off their plate? Consider talking about what you're trading out to make room for this. Lastly, consider the messaging in terms and the words and phrases used to communicate the goal and the objectives. Saying the right things in the wrong way can absolutely implode an initiative before it even gets off the ground. If the goal is important enough, we need to consider how we say this is a must without driving people out of the task before it's even gotten started. And I have something controversial to share here. Feel free to disagree with me, but I've seen this work wonders. Ask yourself who's going to be your loudest naysayers and your loudest critics. Start there. You may disagree with me on that, but if you can get those people on board and get their buy in, it can create some really incredibly smooth sailing from that point forward. This is also where you plan how you're going to provide the context and training for looking at the data related to each objective in the goal. And you're going to write out the steps to doing so that it can be part of the communication plan. Now, to be clear, that part doesn't have to be part of the initial communication. There are stages to communication, of course. Training and monitoring are parts of a communication plan built into the data philosophy as a whole. So here's where you plan out what to and how you're going to decide what are we going to do? How are we going to train the people responsible for meeting these objectives? How and when are the objectives going to be met? And how much progress is being made toward those objectives as we go? With step 7, we actually send out that messaging, but also we have to handle some of the general logistics. You've identified a goal, you've got the right people in the room, you've written down the things and the steps. Now put it out there into the world and get that ball moving. Set up meetings as you see fit to communicate the goal, set up the steps, set up the logistics to ensure it's moving throughout the year. Regarding logistics, I keep saying this and I'll say it some more. Things that are not monitored are optional. So, how important is this goal and these objectives? If they're important enough to set them, then they need to be important enough to follow up on and follow through with them. Set calendar invites for yourself, set timers on your phone if you need to. Remind anyone and everyone about the logistical steps as often as you need to, the cadence of these meetings if meetings are involved, and the goals themselves. If it's a large enough initiative, you might even want to create posters with things on them, like the norms or the expectations. That part about posters isn't necessary for every goal, so take that piece of advice with a grain of salt. For example, we don't need posters talking about assessment revisions, but you might want something for like a fresh PLC and have a poster up about student success and what the student growth goal actually looks like. This step 8 is a little more ambiguous and nebulous than some of the others, which is actually saying something because I've been intentionally a little bit vague so that because there's an infinite number of goals we can look at and in turn an infinite number of philosophies. But communication is going to be paramount for the success of most of the goals that you might try to implement. Making this difficult to communicate progress, gather feedback, or check up on expectations only railroads the ability for people executing the plan to make the goals come to life. This may need to be some place where there needs to be like a bit of negotiation regarding what's on the plate again. But this time it might need to be for the people that need to gather and process the communication itself. When something comes up, say a question arises, something isn't clear in the moment, where do the people enacting the plan go? Who do they ask? And what resources can they tap into to keep things moving? That's what this step is about. With the right culture in place and the right people on the team, very, very rarely is a goal going to fall apart due to a lack of ambition or ability. But it can still fall apart due to a lack of clear communication and the provision of resources to keep things going. Step 9, reinforcing your procedures with professional learning and evaluation. Achieving the goals that we've talked about will rely on not only a clearly communicated data philosophy and clear communication plan, it will need to be reinforced over time. Here's where the training comes into play. Training can come in a lot of forms and can look different for different goals and even different objectives. But this is where the rubber is going to start meeting the road. Depending on the objectives and the goals, the learning can be in depth, it can be quick, it can be informal, it can be everything in between. The expertise of your people and the depth of the goal will determine what that needs to look like. So don't feel like you have to have a cookie cutter approach to this. This is also where something I've talked about before really comes into play, incorporating Strive and some kind of observation tool in the process to provide feedback and monitor processes and progress on those processes. This is an excellent opportunity to catch evidence for domain one, like I said, almost no matter what the goal or the objectives are. And remember, it's about feedback and reinforcement. It doesn't have to be linked to evaluations unless it needs to be linked to evaluations. Feedback is feedback, whether it's official or not. P.S. Bonus material here. Have any of you actually considered conducting a walkthrough on your people during a district-run professional development? That's domain 4 all the way. So think about that. And last step here, live your data philosophy day to day. The last step here is to serve as a reminder. The best way to drive change after you've planned for it and started living it, or started it actually, is to live by what you've set. One of the worst ways to undermine a goal is to separate yourself from it. Things rarely run on autopilot, and someone has to be at the helm of the goal and the philosophy, ensuring it's functioning and ensuring change is real and meaningful. And also keep in mind, you don't have to be the one to stand at the helm by yourself. You built a team to get this far, tap into that team and have them help you lead, model, and drive. Leadership, again, is a team sport. All right, now let's pull it all together into a quick summary. We've talked about building the foundation. This is where culture and readiness for your goal and your data philosophy comes into play. Answering that question, why is this important? It's important because it saves time. It helps us make informed decisions in ways that are more efficient and are solidified and not guessing. You've identified a goal. You've built a team. Then you actually build the frame or the plan. You've built an understanding about how a philosophy can differ at a school, district, and team level. You have to think about monitoring the goal and progress towards that goal. Step 5B, when you get the slideshow later, that's where the data philosophy actually becomes tangible and becomes a thing that you can start passing out to people, procedures and steps to follow. Data philosophies are very goal specific, which is different than a data vision. Philosophies can be incorporate pieces of the vision, but the philosophies are for the goal itself. Then finally, communication and execution. Write a message and sorry, I need to revise that bullet later. Write some kind of messaging and have a training plan. You have to set the stage with appropriate meetings, schedules, check-ins. You have to establish those procedures and you have to reinforce all practices.